Yeah, let's have a great conversation about how fashion can manifest a positive future. What do you guys think about the title of tonight's event?
It's a really big question, and I don't know, the conversation could go in all kinds of directions. I think that's quite exciting about it, and I think with all of us coming from slightly different perspectives, it'll be really interesting to see how it all progresses and what we end up covering and what we don't, I suppose, will also be interesting.
Yeah,
I think we knew fashion was ready for a reset, and I hope this is an opportunity to get there.
Yeah, definitely, especially heading into the busy month that September is.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about the title, the manifestation bit of it for me, is to be able to manifest things, you have to be able to visualize them. So when we think about visualizing a positive future, it's, you know, what does that actually look like? And you have to sort of work back from that and break it down into really simple steps, you know, which it's kind of easier said than done, but yeah.
Yeah.
Great, well, hopefully we'll make some headway tonight. Cool, well, I think we'll give it just another minute or so. Hopefully everyone can hear us okay. If you guys can or can't hear us, just shout in the chat box, and feel free to interact throughout the evening. We'll be keeping an eye on this area. Yeah, any questions or comments, thoughts, feelings? Share away.
It'd be interesting to know who, who's joining us, so then we can kind of, obviously we'll be able to understand the questions, but just gauge who's actually joining, whether it's sort of like consumers, industry, people looking to get into sustainability, kind of, you know, or they're already, you know, sort of experts, or what they want to know about as well.
Definitely. So drop in the chat box who you are, where you're from, and what you do.
Or even unmute yourself and say it now.
Yeah, or jump on screen. Nothing rude, please. It's always the fear with Zoom calls, isn't it?
Yeah. We did actually have one with Fashion Roundtable. It was terrible. Got really badly hacked. Put up pictures of porn. Started saying really bad things. It was pretty insane. Yeah.
What, did you not have a password on the event?
It was like really early days, and we I can't remember. I mean, it was like months and months ago, so it was just I don't know if we had a password or not, but it wasn't an open event. It was one that was only sent round to a few people, but it must have somehow got
in. Wow. Well, on that note, only turn your cameras on if you are doing so for appropriate reasons. Let's not taint tonight's concept, please. But yeah, okay, cool. So anyone else who wants to join from now is obviously more than welcome, but I think we'll make a quick start. So hi everyone, thank you all for joining us here tonight. I'm Amanda, the events manager at Lane Design Club. Super excited for tonight's event, all about sustainability in the industry. And yeah, I will be here closely monitoring the chat box, and if anyone doesn't want to turn on their camera and speak, I can be your voice for the evening. And yeah, I'll quickly hand over to Alice, who'll be your host for tonight. We are together in the same room, but at a safe 2-meter distance. So we'll be juggling our microphones for no background noise. Yeah, just a couple of intros from our attendees. We've got Jackie from Motif Handmade, designer and producer of handwoven yardage in Bangladesh. Great, thank you for joining us, Jackie. Lisa is based in San Diego. Wow. And looking to shift towards sustainable fashion. So great, thank you guys for joining us. I'll hand over to Alice now, your host of the evening.
Hi everybody, Alice. I'm just here at the Design Club. Really excited to be doing this today. Are we going to have an echo? You need to turn your volume off. Sorry about that. We are really excited here to be talking about quite a broad discussion. Can fashion manifest a positive future? So, as I'm sure you're all aware, or no judgment if you're not, we are living in a bit of a state of a climate emergency, and fashion and textiles are one of the most polluting and wasteful industries. Maybe not the people who are talking to you today, but the industry as a whole does continue to lack transparency, and there is still widespread exploitation of people working in fashion supply chains. However, I feel, and hopefully a lot of you do, that over the last few months there has been a change. So, you know, yes, on the negative side, there has never been this many people living in slavery, and you know, fashion is hugely behind this. And I would still say, sadly, brands, retailers aren't taking enough responsibility. But COVID, from my perspective, has shone a light on some of these things. And I do think that this, you know, raises the idea and the topic of how sustainability and fashion are going to live, and ethics within that as well, post-COVID. So whilst this has been a difficult few months for our history, it has, you know, meant a lot of people have had a lot of time to reflect and to really think about what they can do in their own sphere to drive change and hopefully solidify a more sustainable future. The only thing is, potentially, could this just be a short-lived pandemic trend when people have had time, but now we're going back to our busy lives? Are we just going to stop caring as much? You know, there was a bit of a PR nightmare and a huge news feed about what was going on with garment workers and manufacturers who lost orders and lost work. You know, are we just going to leave that for now? And I think that's something we can discuss in quite detail today. How are we going to get to maintain this change and not just let it be a short-lived trend? Potentially how we can also use things like the UN's SDGs as a bit of a map to bring this forward, and overall how we can continue to make positive change in our own lives, our business lives, and then as a whole with society. Sorry, that felt like a bit of a ramble. This is quite a big question. How can fashion manifest a positive future? You know, where do we even start with this? But luckily for us, we do have three incredible women from this sphere who have contributed enormously in their own right to the sustainable fashion movement, and hopefully we'll be able to work through some of these issues. As Amanda already said, all opinions and questions are very welcome. We'll be keeping an eye on the chat box, so do put those thoughts, questions, and if you do want to speak, do unmute yourselves. That's totally fine. Let's make this as much of a discussion as possible. So let's start us off with introductions from our three speakers. And if you don't mind, by just telling us your name, a bit about your background, and maybe in a couple of broad opening statements, how you feel fashion can manifest a positive future. Should we start with Tamsin? You are once again the nearest image, so we'll go that way.
Sure. Wonderful to be a part of this again. And how fortunate are we to have this group that is small enough to be able to have everybody contribute if you would like to. That's rare. So I wanted to ask, it's so helpful those of you who've shared what you do. If any of others of you would just say who you are and where you're from, that would really help us as panelists to get our answers right and tailor them to make it useful to you. So I'm Tamsin Lejeune and founded the Ethical Fashion Forum back in, gosh, the beginning of time of ethical fashion back in 2006. We were the industry body for sustainable fashion. and then raised funds from industry in 2016, including some quite important brands like Roland Murray, Vivienne Westwood, backing us. And so the goal of that was to try and take what we'd started with Ethical Fashion Forum to scale. So we began with Ethical Fashion Forum just as a small group of entrepreneurs, business owners. Interesting to see that, Jackie, you're from Motif Handmade, because Bangladesh, a network from Bangladesh was one of our founding members of Ethical Fashion Forum. And so we were, you know, fairly early in looking at what we could do to make more of a difference in the industry. And that's where Common Objective came from. So 2 things that govern the platform, and interested to know if you're not already a member, we'd love you to join. It's completely free. It's a bit like a LinkedIn for sustainable fashion. You can meet over 30,000 amazing, inspirational individuals and brands and suppliers from all over the world on there. But our goal was to really turn sustainability from a cost to an opportunity for many. And I'm sure many of you, if you run small businesses or have operated within them, recognize how challenging it is. It's hard enough to operate well and successfully in the fashion industry without considering sustainability because of the competition from the high street. So we wanted to make it easier, and just two ways we do that on Co. One, you sign up, you specify what you need, and you're matched through a dashboard with information, over 300 resources on there, with training, with connections. And we also weight the businesses. So you can create a business profile for free if you have a brand or a supplier. And the more sustainable your business, the higher its search rankings. So you're going to get more customers. And we're really pleased to see that's working. Some of our highest ranking suppliers are getting 80% of their orders through the site. So that makes me really happy. And just to say, if you haven't joined, we've got a COVID offer where all the premium content on there, all our tools and resources are completely free and available to everyone. So I've spoken a bit long, but you asked me for ideas on manifesting a positive future. So I'll just very quickly say, I think it's all about leadership. It's all about really bold leadership at the top. And we've not really seen that in the big brands. For me, bold leadership means doing more than a sticking plaster solution. So doing more than finding ways to mitigate the effects of an unsustainable business model, but actually changing the business model. And we're seeing that happening with small businesses in exciting ways. I haven't seen it happen at the top of the biggest businesses, and that's what needs to happen.
Thank you so much. Before I move on to Jodie, we have had a few more introductions from our audience. So we have Charlotte from London, who is a production manager and design associate at Mimi Berry, which are made in England handbags and accessories. Welcome, Charlotte. We have Jack, who is a London design director for co-living startup The Collective, Sustainable Shared Living. Welcome, Jack. We have Megan, who is a textile design student from Glasgow. We have Chantel, who's not in fashion, but an interested consumer. And then we have Camilla from Nashville, Tennessee, wow, who is a sustainable fashion activist, writer and speaker, founder of Greater Than Equal international marketing and leadership consulting firm for social impact organizations and artists. Wow, well, aren't we lucky? We've got a very interesting group of people in their own right today. So thank you so much for joining us, guys. As always, as we said before, if you didn't hear me, do chime in with any questions or comments. We'd love to hear from you. Jodie, can we get a little intro from you?
Of course. I'm Jodie Muter-Hamilton. I'm basically the founder of a platform called Black Neon Digital, which is an editorial and podcast platform. And I founded that because I used to have a swimwear brand, which I started when I was actually living in Mauritius a while ago. And basically I wanted to make ethical swimwear. So I did some samples out there, came back to the UK and hunted down one of the only remaining factories in the UK, which I had to wait a year for their production. Long story short, it was quite difficult. Price points were quite high. You know, you're coming in from having a cost price of like £25. So you can imagine what you need to sell that for. retail. And yeah, long and short, we had a financial crash. It was really tough. I kind of had to build everything back up again. Some of the things that I was really proud of at that time was I was one of the first own created consumer platform, like direct to consumer website, which I spent 10 grand building from scratch, which kind of is nuts to think about that now, because you can do it on Squarespace for 20 quid a month. So yeah, kind of lots of things have changed since then. And what I do now with Black Neon Digital is I help startups, scale-ups, and sometimes bigger brands kind of navigate what they're trying to achieve from a product perspective, but also literally from their soul, who they are, kind of what they want to create, and kind of the life they want to live as well. So looking at sustainability, not just as a product, but a lifestyle for themselves. I'm communications director at Fashion Roundtable and a partner there. And basically what we do there is we bridge the gap between the fashion industry and the policy leaders. So we have a two-way sort of relationship whereby we try and educate policy leaders about the fashion industry, and then also educate the fashion industry about what you can do and use policy to affect change in a really, you know, systemic, legal, kind of long-lasting way. And then recently I've been working for a while on a project called Project 2030, and that is essentially how we had food labeling system for food, you know, the traffic light system, doing that for fashion. So that's like a ridiculously huge project. And yeah, kind of looking at the SDGs for that, and kind of lots of different people coming on board to help with that. So we're working on onboarding partners and kind of finance and all the fun stuff. Yeah, and then the manifesting thing, I think that, you know, yes, I totally agree with Tamsin, you need bold leadership, but those bold leaders also have to be completely rooted in themselves and really understand what they're trying to achieve. And to be bold, they kind of, you know, they're confident, they understand things, they're knowledgeable, and what makes a bold leader, and kind of like understanding and unpacking that. I think we definitely need to do. I also think that we need to really look at this consumption and self-worth. We've not begun to deal with this, you know, whether that's images or looking at Kim Kardashian or whatever it is, you know, this has not been dealt with yet from a self-worth point of view, and understanding that as a female, as a business leader, as a, you know, think about that.
Perhaps something that we will talk about today.
Yes,
it is a very interesting topic indeed.
Yeah.
We've also had Fiona join us, who is a freelance writer on fashion ethics, sustainability and politics. So welcome, Fiona. Hannah, if we could get your intro, that would be great.
Hi, yes. So I'm Hannah Carter. I'm campaign manager for Love Not Landfill, which comes from London Waste and Recycling Board. So I'm kind of the consumer textile part of that. London Waste and Recycling Board basically helps London meet the mayor's recycling target. So we work with the boroughs, but I am there just purely for the Love Not Landfill campaign, which is all about changing the behaviour of young people in London and now nationwide in how they buy, care for and dispose of clothing. So really tackling this issue of consumption and waste as well. So that's what the campaign's all about. We started in April 2018 as part of the European Clothing Action Plan, which was funded by the EU. And we've got clothes banks out around London. We've done some pop-up shops, some second-hand pop-up shops with charities, and also some Depop shop as well. We've gone into schools to talk to sixth formers, universities, lectures, all kinds of things, just spreading the word wherever we can, really. Now we're no longer part of the European Union funding, so, but basically Love Not Landfill had quite a high impact. Over a third of young people in London heard of us in our first 2 years, and so London Waste and Recycling Board decided to keep the project going. So we're now into 2020, obviously got tripped up a bit like everyone else by the pandemic, so we've had to readjust our plans and our campaigns, but hopefully still loads of quite high impact stuff that's coming up with us. So So that's basically the side of it. My background is in PR, and I got into sustainable fashion just through kind of personal interest when living in Amsterdam, where there's quite a big movement there, and I got involved with it there, and then came back to the UK, and just, yeah, it was something I just wanted to give as much as I could to, really, and give all my time and try and just move the cause forward. In terms of the point of the fashion, the positive future, I think what's really important is a shift in the relationship between brands and consumers and clothing. So for brands, it's about deeper engagement with their consumers. Investigation and transparency is so important, and appreciating the value of their products. I think I don't think there's some brands that, obviously a lot of them on the Lone Design Club, that could honestly say they're very proud of what they produce. But I think the problem we have is with the brands that probably wouldn't honestly say that. And if we could get to a place where everybody was proud of the fashion they produced and its role in the world, then I think that would be really important. For consumers, it's again understanding value of clothing and who made the clothes, the cost of the materials, the emotional value. And I think Jodie touched on that, which I think is really important, that, you know, what clothes do for people. When you put on a piece of clothing, how it affects your mood, your confidence. It's about identity. There's so much there. And if that, you know, I'm not saying it should cost a lot, but if people don't value that in the clothing that they wear, then I think it's a real shame. So I think it's this understanding of value, and I think that would then address the consumption and the waste problems that we have.
Amazing. And you have all, which I love, raised things that weren't even initially on my mind, and now I've got loads of notes that we can talk about. Just a little bit, very briefly, about me. Before joining LDC, I was working for the Ethical Fashion Initiative in Geneva, which is part of the UN. So that was an amazing experience for me last year. Really seeing sort of firsthand, I think they've been around sort of a similar length of time as you, Tamsin, some of the pioneers in this sphere. So it was great to be involved there and sort of see that side of the industry. I first came interested in sustainable fashion in 2015 when I was studying my postgrad at LCF. Really everything changed for me there, and I've never really looked back. Ended up writing my dissertation on modern slavery within fashion supply chains. So ever since then, this has been a real focus of mine. So really keen to get to discuss this further. And I honestly, maybe I am just a through and through optimist, but I do really believe that there is a place for fashion in the future, and it doesn't have to be all bad. So I think hopefully everyone can leave here feeling, you know, more educated, but also more positive. So without further ado, let's kick off with I think we're going to go straight into COVID, because I think it is important to address that this has happened in the next few months. From your guys' perspective, and anyone can start, and like we said, audience, please do feel free to add anything in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. What do you feel, from your perspectives, ladies, are some of the major issues that COVID-19 has raised for the fashion industry?
Yeah, so I'm going to come in positive as well, because it's all doom and gloom recently.
Yes. So on the flip side, and we can address this all in one go. You know, an issue that was big in the news was garment worker rights and manufacturers losing orders. Obviously, that was quite a big COVID-19. This is not a COVID-19 issue, just so you all know, folks, in case you didn't know. This is just a lifetime issue. But, you know, from one perspective, was this coming to light? Has this achieved results? Did workers really, you know, suffer more than normal? What's going to happen to them now? But then I suppose on the flip side, you know, we have seen an increase in conscious consumerism, environments recovering, less pollution. We've seen animals returning to their natural habitats. So in the bigger picture, we can look at it from the positive and the negative. What have been some of the major impacts of the last few months?
Yeah, I am the very fortunate position of connecting with amazing both suppliers and brands every day and seeing what they're doing. And we have seen devastation amongst suppliers. we've seen really challenging situations for particularly in developing world countries where there's a limited welfare safety net and things are still dire. But we're also seeing the brands that the opportunity for sustainable fashion. So one of your questions was, can fashion be sustainable? And from my perspective, fashion at its essence is a positive force. And we bring together, the incredible businesses that are proving that, both on the supplier side and the brand side. I think one negative but long-term positive thing that COVID has really brought to the fore is the inequities in the current system. Sustainability has become far more mainstream in the last 5 years, really transformed from when I began talking about this when I wasn't allowed into London Fashion Week in the early days, and now they welcome me with open arms. That's quite a switch around. But recently, all the talk has been around the environment and how climate change, and these issues are major, but social issues and how the supply chain affects workers was somewhat sidelined. And I think there's also been a growing movement of the best way to address climate change through fashion is to buy nothing. And I think that's true, to minimize our climate impact, we should buy less. However, what I think is good about the terrible thing, the kind of silver lining to all the negativity, is that we've seen that the fashion business does support thousands of people and change their lives. And especially those businesses that are operating to high standards, they're creating really meaningful jobs for people in the supply chain. So one of the things that our suppliers are saying to us is, it can't go back. We can't go back to the way it was. We're not going to go back to the way it was, never again. We're never going to take the risk as we did before. Suppliers who've had to make commitments before they've had the funds to pay for the orders, they've already paid for materials, they've already taken the risk. And that, I think, is going to change, which is a positive.
Amazing. Well, hopefully hopefully some of this really does stick, and this is something we'll continue to see change for the next few months. Chantel has just added that she thinks people consider clothing more as a necessity rather than a product that they can really enjoy, which I think is something you sort of touched on, Jodie, as well, is that relationship with clothing, indicating that there isn't much consideration to where clothes come from. It's really just a thing. And Jackie has added that this is what they see in Bangladesh, like we've been in a crucible and the cross is being burned off. So she agrees with you wholeheartedly that change is definitely happening, and that is fantastic to hear from someone. Jodie, do you have Jodie or Hannah, do you have anything to add on this?
Definitely got two sides to it. So with Fashion Roundtable, we're also secretariat for two APPGs. So one is called the Ethics and Sustainability in Fashion, and the other one is called the APPG for Textiles and Fashion. And what that means is we have a cross-party, all-party group within Parliament, and we talk about issues that are being raised. And we've had some interesting evidence sessions for the Ethics and Sustainability APPG, where we invited people to discuss exactly the supply chain issues that are happening in the UK, but also globally. So for example, we had a manufacturer that basically was from Bangladesh and spoke very candidly about the fact that he actually can't now afford to buy his family clean water to drink. And that really brings it home in quite a deep level. I mean, you know, you can't sit and listen to that and not want to do something on a daily basis to kind of put that right. And I think that, you know, that is harrowing, and we have, you know, emails all the time about different situations, and we worked on the PPE sort of campaign with the government very early on and things like that. So, you know, there's lots of really negative, horrible things happening. and it shows no sign of letting up. We did something with Tradecraft, who were an amazing body who did this really fun kind of interactive, almost survey type thing, but it showed you who hadn't paid for their orders, and it also showed you who the owners of those companies were. So for example, you know, Arcadia and Philip Green, and showed, it was quite entertaining how they'd kind of put things in a light-hearted way, but in a really serious kind of manner. Yeah, so basically, like, you know, Philip Green on his yacht and not paying people in Bangladesh for their orders. Also, someone's just put up something about Boohoo. So we've worked on that as well, in the sense that I don't know, I can probably share in a link, or you can share around to other people. There's a letter that got sent to Boohoo, and there's a lot of signatories on that, and also British Retail Consortium have sort of put things in place for that to try and change that situation. And there's a QC review happening they've not said that they're going to release full report, but they're going to release details around September time. So we'll be following that up really closely and looking at ways that we can actually try and create a positive change from this actual incident, because basically the EAC report, you know, so the EAC was Environmental Audit Committee. They flagged this over 2 years ago, and it's, you know, still happening. So whether it's Bangladesh or UK, there's an inequality, and we need to level up that inequality, because it's not happening and it's dragging on and it's going on. And the only way we can level that up with actual policy change, with legislation, with regulation, and actually then being able to crack down and stop companies producing in ways that are terrible. On the flip side though, I've had some really wonderful people contact me recently, like a guy in Pakistan who wants to create his own brand, and he works for really huge companies, and he's just getting a bit upset and just wants to do it himself. So he is, I kind of really feel that sea of change coming, because it's like, why now would I produce for a company when I can do it myself? With, you know, the whole direct to consumer, you can reach people now. It's not, that power balance it's not necessary anymore in the same way. So I'm really excited about the fact that we can create that change and really support the people in, for example, this guy Pakistan, to do that, and do that in the right way, and, you know, again, like I say, level up that power balance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm going to try not to go on too many tangents, but you guys obviously raise a lot of interesting issues. So, and this is interesting for me because, you know, we mentioned Boohoo, but it wasn't just Boohoo in the news. It was factories in Bangladesh, right? But why does it take it being in Leicester on our doorstep for us to really respond and care? You know, this has always fascinated me psychologically. Why do we struggle so much to identify with someone who's so far away with us, but then, oh my goodness, no, this happened in Leicester? And it's like, this couldn't happen in the UK, but it has. And suddenly this is, you know, has really brought this issue to the forefront, because it's happening just, you know, miles away in the north of our country. And I think, I don't know, and maybe this is maybe way too psychological, but do you guys have any insight on that? And do you think this is why we struggle to make some of the changes, because we are so focused on our own immediate, you know, geography, essentially?
I just have a thought on that, and I think this was an effect potentially of the pandemic, in that when, you know, suddenly we locked down and the world got really small and everyone was scared, in a real state of anxiety, and in those times, I guess you just close down, and the most important is you and your immediate family, but then the country as a whole. So I think just in terms of news media, that may be why it was just something closer to home, because everything felt closer to home. Do you know what I mean? We were kind of immune to this kind of stuff. We lived our lives, everything was available, we were global, we could do anything we wanted. And then suddenly that ended, and yeah, so then these bad things happening close by are just a lot, I don't know, more relevant maybe.
Yeah,
I don't know, it's just a theory.
I think if you look at the history of the garment industry, it started to get, what triggered the exploitation in supply chains was when we went global, when it became possible for suppliers and people on the buy side to blinker themselves to what was happening in the supply chains. And if you look at what transformed the garment sector here in the UK, it was seeing it on your doorstep. Yeah. That's when people sat up and take notice. So putting a positive spin on this, I think that Zoom and the fact that we've suddenly recognized that we can connect with people across the world. Now, whenever I have a panel for the first time, when I'm asked to moderate a panel, I make sure there's a supplier coming in from wherever they are in the world, and that's transformative. That's never happened before. But because we're virtual, we can do that. So I hope that we can turn that into a catalyst for closer relationships.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, yeah, that's true. And that would have definitely transformed things. And, I was speaking to one of our designers the other day, and unfortunately, COVID has meant that one the factory she uses just outside London has actually gone out of business, which is very sad, family-owned factory. But she then told me that actually finding a factory she felt comfortable with using in the UK or in and around London actually was a very difficult search for her. She said you wouldn't believe actually the conditions that some people are working in right on our doorstep, and they're probably to an extent not as bad as further abroad, but she really had to take a long time vetting different people until she felt comfortable working with one. So it is interesting how easily we can sort of turn a blind eye. But you're right, technology has probably opened up a lot of those doors and made us far more aware of everything that's going on in the world. Hannah, I kind of hijacked your possibility of giving us some sort of negative or positive scenarios of COVID-19.
Yeah, I had a few quite sort of different thoughts just from what I know about sort of consumption and waste. So the first obvious is we've lost brands. So Oasis, Warehouse, Cath Kids and Debenhams. Drapers have just reported Jigsaw is now in trouble as well. So
to work for Oasis.
Pardon?
I used to work for Oasis.
Oh gosh, right. So I mean, nobody wants to see that happen, but I mean, obviously all these brands have their own sustainable troubles, but not anymore. So the other thing is I want to talk about, so textile recycling, that suddenly had the textile recycling industry suddenly had a real problem, because we have already more waste clothes than we can deal with in the UK, so they're sold abroad. And these markets were just closed overnight. So waste clothing began to stockpile here. And we saw early in lockdown the newspaper headlines of piles of clothing outside banks and charity shops, because charity shops, of course, shut down. They couldn't take any clothes. So people were fly tipping clothing. And all of that fly tipped clothing would end up in landfill. Councils wouldn't, they don't recycle it. They would just pick it up and throw it in landfill with all the other waste. So that was an absolute nightmare at the beginning. Now reopening is happening and the clothes are being dealt with, and very quickly Textile Recycling Association was looking for warehousing for all this clothing, so they saved as much as they could, and these countries are now opening up. But the thing that those countries are now starting, I think to be a bit stronger, is that they don't want to accept unwearable clothes anymore. I mean, there is a thriving second-hand clothing industry in certain countries in Africa, but they don't want clothes that people don't want to buy. They want good quality clothes, second-hand clothing from the UK, from the US and anywhere else. They don't want the rubbish. And I'm hoping that is now going to start to happen. But what that means is that in the UK, we're going to have to innovate on dealing with our own waste. So we're going to need textile investment in the textile recycling here on our shores, to turn fibers into recycled fibers, to be separating fibers, to all these other things, and finding what we can do with this waste clothing that isn't good enough for markets abroad. I think the other big issue that came up was online shopping and returns. So of course we know Boohoo, all the other online brands did pretty well during lockdown, and they suddenly launched all these loungewear collections that were being made somehow, even though the rest of the world was on lockdown. So that was all a bit odd. But so they were doing very well. And it just, so many people buying online, and of course you're not trying on, you're not checking it, you can't feel the product before you buy. So returns, there's a stat I found, 2.25 million tons of waste is generated through returns every year. And that's just an absolute nightmare. And that's the clothes themselves. And most brands, even the big brands, don't have, you know, everything that's returned is kind of returned for different reasons. So they don't have the processes in place and to manage all of these returns, to make sure those items do get sold again or repaired or whatever else. So many returned clothes end up in landfill. And over lockdown, people were just mindlessly buying and buying. And so that obviously was a major problem. And of course, you've got the carbon footprint. If you are selling unsold, you know, you want to sell on the unsold clothing, the returned clothing, then you've got to ship it around the world. And it just goes on. And I think that's something else that the fashion industry is going to have to address now, because the pandemic sadly isn't going anywhere anytime soon. There's going to be more online purchasing compared to going bricks and mortar into the high street. So the issue of returns is going to stay. So I think that needs to be top of the list really for this coming back better kind of idea, is that handling returns so that they're not costing, you know, don't have this carbon impact that they're having at the moment.
And are we investing in this? Are we at all investing in this innovation that we need to be able to handle this textile waste and recycling?
I'm not sure. Jodie might know a bit more on that. I'm hoping. I've heard the Textile Recyclers Association are trying to address this in some way, but I don't know the details.
I think there is a desire to support kind of like, you know, less waste, but also I think we have to look at the beginning of it and make less waste in the beginning, you know. And that comes from, you know, if we think about the amount of returns just on ASOS, for example, and how consumers buy things. You know, one of my best friends, I said to her, you know, it's actually her birthday on Saturday, and she basically bought £1,000 worth of clothes just to try on so she could then sort of send them back. And this is one of my best friends, do you know what I mean? So it's like, not as if I haven't been badgering her for years, but you know, and it's that, like, why are we doing this? It's, well, at the minute we can't try things on. Even if you go to a shop, you can't try it on. So what does that mean? You know, does it mean that we have to have digital versions of ourselves to put into the clothes? That could be quite a simple answer. There's lots of people out there doing that and looking at new innovation around that. So you have your own avatar, you fit it into the different clothes. Companies can then create the clothes, you know, in their right sizes, the right measurements. So you can buy better in the instance, you know what it looks like on you. You know, and for me, I don't really buy anything particularly, but if I do, like, you know, I want to still touch it. So I'm still a huge fan of going into shops, you know, because I love feeling things. I love clothes. I love that connection. I love the story behind it. So I think, yeah, that connection, again, back to the storytelling, comes from having stories to tell about a product, doesn't it? And kind of where the love comes from. And when we think about, you know, the love part of life and fashion, we need to, again, reconnect back with that and make less waste. And when we do make waste, let's not dump it on Africa, because it also kills their artisans, you know. So yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, how do we do this? So I think both Jodie and Hannah, and actually all three of you have touched on this in your sort of intros, is this relationship with clothing. And how we directly associate that. I think you said with self-worth, Jodie. You know, I guess for a lot of people, this overconsumption is to make them happy. You know, it's a culture that we've sort of been brought up with. You know, retail therapy quite literally is, you know, spending loads of money buying loads of new things and hoping that will solve all life's problems. That didn't used to be the case, I don't think. I mean, obviously I wasn't around, but even when I was younger, I don't remember people having this same desire to just buy all the time, and this strange sense that would fix whatever was wrong with your day. But how do we fix this? Because, you know, a lot of the brands we work with are small, and, you know, to touch on something we were just talking about, this waste, a lot of our brands are actually moving towards, you know, if they weren't already doing tiny order runs, they're doing them. A lot more of them are doing made to order or pre-order to try and minimize on that upfront cost and that upfront waste, which is fantastic in one of the ways. And obviously these are small brands, and you do feel that love, and I do love looking at the look on someone's face when they find this amazing product and they meet the designer, and that for me is something that probably would fix something that went wrong in your day. But not walking into H&M and buying 10 t-shirts for £3, that wouldn't bring me any joy. But how do we address this? And, you know, is this a marketing issue? Is this just a general societal issue? What can we do to make people think differently about their relationship with clothing and consumption?
I can go first if you want. I think it's super deep rooted. I think it comes from lots of different ways. So kind of when I hear people say make and mend do and repair and darn and all that sort of stuff, like, I'm a massive advocate of sewing. You know, I've sewn since I was really young. My mom's had a haberdashery shop. My grandma grew, you know, worked in the mills. You kind of, you know, it's ingrained. But whether it's like a northern thing, so we can start to dissect stuff, you know, a girl that grew up in Newcastle that on a Friday night had to have a new outfit because other people would think that you didn't have any money, is kind of something that you need to think about. So it's this relationship with money and self-worth, and how do you show that you have money, you have something new, you have something expensive. So can we start to dissect and pull apart money and worth, and what things cost, and, you know, what you're worth because it's attributed to money. And when we start to think about that in terms of paying more for clothes, we're talking about sustainable garments are more expensive. So does that then mean that people who can't afford that price point are not worth that? And we have to really be careful around these conversations, because I think that it's so layered. You know, if you think about what makes people feel good about themselves, isn't necessarily always wearing a second-hand dress. I'm sorry, it just isn't. You know, maybe you want something new, but maybe can that new thing be something that you've worked with a designer to create from dead stock fabric? Like, maybe the role of designers is not to create new things anymore. Maybe it's more personal and tailored, and we work with you know, dead stock fabric only, or whatever it is, and work with Love Not Landfill and create these new things from old things, you know.
It's interesting because one of our brands who, and, you know, she's independent, she's a small brand, you know, has always been conscious of the way she produces, but for her, lockdown has actually completely transformed her business, and she doesn't have a new collection in the works. She's focused the last 2 months on just upcycling pieces that didn't sell into completely new pieces, and they're selling really well because they're unique, they're personal. You can message her and she'll make it for you, and I think that connection is probably the way we need to go, and that's the relationship we should have with clothing.
Agree.
Okay, interesting. Tamsin or Hannah, do you have any other thoughts on that?
I have some thoughts. We've recently completed some audience insights work, so talking to young people in London, and what we found was that they're now more focused, I think, maybe because of COVID and the positive things that have come from it. They're more focused on how their choices affect the bigger picture. And what was very interesting, and this, you know, it's hard to fathom that when you're kind of in sustainable fashion and thinking this stuff day in, day out, but most people don't make the connection between fashion and the environment still. And so we were asking this group of young people to go and do some research. So they kind of were like, all right, we'll Google. And they didn't know that fashion had an impact on the environment. When we asked them initially, just talk about, you know, environment, they were talking about plastic in the sea. They were talking about animal welfare, animal cruelty. Those were the top two that came up. And then when we asked them to investigate about fashion and the environment, they didn't get it. They were like, what? It's a high polluter, you know, and they were finding all these stats and going, God, I didn't know this. and then saying, well, now I need to think about this now. I need to absorb it and work out what I'm going to do about it. But so I'm hoping that's going to kind of stick, that is going to be something that we see kind of that stays, and then what will come with that is them sort of thinking about brands, and we saw from the research that they're very happy to walk away from brands that don't do the right thing. You know, around the Black Lives Matter movement, they could name brands that hadn't responded in a way that they thought was right, and they were going to boycott them and that kind of thing. So they're very happy to do that. But they were talking about fashion and identity, and so many of them said that clothes for them are a way to express themselves. Literally almost all of them said that, and some in more detail than others, but and that's what they felt. And for young people at that age, who, you know, they know that they're being judged by the, you know, people see them and that's the first thing they see, and they're being judged by that, and they're saying something, and people are getting that message and interpreting it about them. It's absolutely crucial to them about, you know, what they wear. And so I think what Jodie was saying about what these people can afford and what statements they can make and everything else, you've got to be really, really sensitive around it, which is why Love Not Landfill we don't guilt people. We have our personal opinions on certain brands, but we're never going to say don't go to H&M or don't go to this brand, because, you know, we understand our audience and how we're kind of understanding more and more how their lives relate to clothing. And it's just, there's better ways. There's absolutely better ways to get them to sort of move along with us, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so is it the consumer whose responsibility the change is then? Because maybe not solely. Is it the consumer's responsibility? Is it government's responsibility? Is it us in this call? Is it businesses, brands? And whose responsibility is it? All of us, one of them, some of them? And how can each of them have their say and, you know, be part of this manifestation of change?
I think one of the problems we regularly see is that people are continually passing on the responsibility. So brands say it's consumers, or it's their suppliers say it's brands, and etc. And I think we all hold responsibility, and none of us can change it. The only one party who can change it separate from the others is the regulators, and they're the ones who are doing least. So we certainly can't rely upon consumers, and we also shouldn't depend upon consumers, because the situation we now have is a result of 50 years of fashion businesses pushing what is a very lucrative business model for them, which is to sell lots of product cheaply. And the evidence demonstrates that people spend a lot more buying many items at low cost than they would if the product was priced higher. So they end up spending more. So the argument, which is often touted around democracy, and it is important, why should fashion only be for the few? But I think it's not really credible in the case of large fast fashion retailers saying we're doing this for democratic reasons, when the fact is they're in a way creating an addiction amongst people who can't afford that. I see rental as the solution. And so I'm interested in this forum and welcome your comments and thoughts as to whether, you know, what is it going to take to tip rental over? So rental has so much going for it. We can have the joy and the excitement of the new. It can be affordable and democratic. It can create fulfilling jobs because you're creating things slowly and beautifully. It can be sustainable all the way down the supply chain. It ticks all the boxes. We just have to crack the business model. We haven't quite done that yet. And part of that is making it appealing to consumers. So interested in people's thoughts and whether anyone in this forum already does buy rental, and if not, why not?
I mean, I've thought about it a few times. Obviously, I'm interested about, you know, I think it's a fantastic concept, and I agree. I'd love to hear from others on this. I think for me, one of the barriers I see, and you know, it's kind of again comes down to this fashion for the few or for the many, but a lot of rental platforms feel very exclusive. and they feel like a club that you're not sure you can be a part of, or you have to join a waiting list and you never hear back, or you just having to join a waiting list in the first place sometimes would put someone off if they weren't really sure, and just sort of that makes it feel a little bit unattainable, and like maybe the products are all maybe it's going to cost too much, and I think I've come across different models, some that, you know, it's this monthly fee. And I think for a lot of people, you know, subscription has definitely done well out of the last few months, and subscription is going nowhere. So for a lot of people that works. But then I think for some of these platforms, the initial monthly price might seem a little bit high for someone. I think there's a lot of different things going on. Like you said, maybe it's just no one's quite cracked the perfect business model. I know we'd love to have, you know, a rental station in our pop-up stores, and this is something that we're discussing with different people about how we could make this a reality, you know, alongside, you know, swap rails or that kind of thing. So yeah, I think there's so much there's a lot of them out there now as well, I would say, which is potentially not necessarily a problem, but it also, that's another barrier, is which one do you even go with, which one's right for you. But those are just some of the things that I've come across and that I've spoken to people about.
I wonder if it would take a fast fashion brand to do rental. I mean, they have this battle, you know, they say, well, this is Primark I'm thinking of, has said they want to sort of talk about, they sort of push the fact that their clothes, whilst they are cheap, they are decent quality. And it's like, well, put your money where your mouth is. You put out
exactly.
Put out a collection that can be rented, can be worn, have multiple users, and then we'll know that you're good quality. And something like that would just bring rental right up, I think, and rental for the masses.
I agree. I think when we see it on the high street, and this is my point about bold leadership, if you know, we hear so much from you know, almost every major high street brand has launched a sustainability initiative. They're serious about it. They need to get into rental.
Yeah,
Lisa has said that she loves the idea of rental in many ways, but is also curious if it actually reinforces the idea of overconsumption in a sense.
It's an interesting one. I mean, I think it does reinforce the idea of the new, of the having that fix, but without the problems, because I mean, the problems of overconsumption are not the fix. They're the impact on supply chains. I suppose you could argue that it's this. I have a 13-year-old daughter, so very aware of this appearance culture and the impact that has on young people. It's horrendous. So yeah, I'm not sure if rental solves that. I think we need to consider other ways to do that.
Yeah, but like you said, you know, bold leaders, and you know, this doesn't necessarily even have to be brands. You know, this could be, and I know some of them do, but it could, you know, young people, that social media, you know, we follow influencers, bloggers, we follow celebrities, models. I mean, I personally don't, because I find it very overwhelming, and I can't handle the pressure of following all these people. But it is something that is, you know, my sister's younger than me, or I have loads of cousins, and it's interesting to watch how they interact with social media and how influenced they are by you know, trendsetters and celebrities. And you know, if suddenly a lot of these people were going, well, I rent all these things from, I don't know, the first one that comes to mind is Her Collective, but you know, I rent everything from Her Collective, and you know, I haven't bought any of these pieces, you know, this is completely sustainable, and you know, it could be really interesting. I think if they had, you know, 1 million followers, 10 million followers, you might see the younger generation be like, oh, well, they did it, so it's cool.
Are there any examples? Not that I know of.
I guess the green carpet, isn't it? You know, they do the green carpet challenge and sort of rewear. I guess that's starting to come through a little bit. But I also think that it is a matter of timing. So like, you know, it's a new model. We maybe haven't got it quite right yet. And also I was fortunate actually to mentor a girl called Sophie Moore, probably about 7 years ago, who created the first ever jewelry rental platform. And it was really tough for her at that time. And I was like, come on, stick with it. and called The Folly, and she's now actually about 9 months ago, I think, sold it to My Wardrobe. So that's really interesting, you know, to think it's taken, well, 7 years for that to kind of come through and happen. And, you know, there was issues around people thinking, how would you clean the jewelry? Could it be sterile? You know, when I think about renting for myself, I still think like, what if I drop something on it? What if I get red wine on it? What if my armpits are sweaty? What happens then? You know, stuff like that. And I think we've got to think about that. I also think that we need to consider if it's not peer-to-peer. So peer-to-peer is where you will literally give it to someone and give it back and sort of pass it around like you would your friends. Whereas if you rent with something like Her Collective, where they house it and then ship it back out, it's kind of if you imagine like the garment miles on that outfit, how many times it goes out, maybe it isn't as sustainable, but at the minute we don't actually know because it's not entirely tried and tested. Like, is it better to just buy one nice thing and have it in your wardrobe and wear that every time you go to a nice dress event or whatever? You know, so I think it's not a full picture yet, is it? We don't really...
It does seem to lend itself more to the high street, doesn't it? So that you can just go in and take it, rather, because the postal issues and the cleaning issues are...
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, and I know some do they build in those costs to their price rather than shock you with the additional dry cleaning fees, because I know some of them it is you pay a certain amount and then at the end they're like, and here's the dry cleaning bill. Whereas I think if it's all included, I think you'd have more luck with people signing up if they didn't have to worry about anything. And like you said, if there was an easier way and it was just dropping it off, literally, again, that would cut out the carbon footprint as well that you mentioned.
We've actually, oh, sorry.
Okay. No.
I was just going to say, we've actually got a podcast coming up with On Alone, New Wardrobe, Aileen from New Wardrobe, and also Lone Hood. And I've managed to get them all to do it together because I want them to have this discussion and dialogue, not just be like one-on-one, and kind of really try and bottom out these questions, which I think will be really interesting for them to work through.
Yeah. And I mean, Hannah, do you think the younger generations, because I know that is a lot of Love Not Landfill's audience is the younger, do you think they would be interested in this kind of thing?
I think it's a big leap for them, if I'm really honest. I think rental is, some are getting there, but I think your point about it feeling a bit exclusive at the moment is one thing. I also think just in terms of fashion and style, they can, you know, there's not a lot of going out happening at the moment, but you know, when there is, rental is often, I think, seen as, you know, a gown for a big occasion or a wedding, you know, a wedding outfit or something, and they can sort of get those to own really, really cheaply at the moment. So I think there's absolute, there'll be the toughest market the toughest audience to turn around to this. But again, I think the answer, as Tamsin was saying, and I was saying, that if they see this in a fast fashion brand, in a high street brand, and that's when they're going to start experimenting with it. If it's easily done, if they walk past it and it's happening, they might have a look. But I think trying to sell the concept of it would be a tough sell, if I'm honest.
And what about swapping? Because I think this could be a big part of the future as well. And we've been talking a lot to Patrick Duffy and of the Global Fashion Exchange about his new thing, the swap chain. And I still can't quite wrap my head around it. It's very, very technical for me, but I do think that swapping could have quite a big place and play a really important role in this sustainable culture, and maybe is one that the younger generations might be more inclined to get involved in, because, you know, there isn't the cost really. It's just you go to a swap shop or you go to an event and you give clothes and you walk away with clothes, and maybe it feels more attainable and more fun, maybe more youthful, I suppose, than signing up to a monthly subscription on a rental platform.
Yeah, I think that's a lot easier, and because a lot of young people they're kind of swapping clothes with friends and siblings a lot anyway, so it's just kind of another step to that. And so I think it's not such a big ask. There's a lot of talk going on. We're actually in conversation with New Wardrobe at the moment, and potentially swap chain for for online swapping. So trying to work out logistics around that, and New Wardrobe are now widening their offering, and you're able to swap without meeting somebody now. So I think it's really moving quite quickly, swapping. And I think, again, if you make it easy, you make it accessible, you put it in front of young people, then they're likely to kind of have a go. And if you can kind of push the environment, that, you know, make this link between the fashion industry and the environment, and explain why it's kind of a good thing. You're not just going to get another piece of clothing that you get to wear and show off, but you can start to talk about the reasons you're doing that, and that's all quite empowering, I think.
Okay. I just want to speak up for the suppliers here. Yes, swapping. Yeah, just because I've been made cognizant, I suppose, of the movement towards this style of no, buy or swap leaves out the opportunity for, and of course it should be part of the mix. Yeah. But there are amazing brands, many of them stocked at LDC. I mean, you've got some incredible ones that are truly transforming opportunities, and we have an unequal world. And so therefore fashion can, as part of its positive manifest, really change lives as well as not impacting on the environment.
Yeah, no, that's true. And you're right, that kind of moving away from that does sort of impact those brands who are making a difference, which isn't fair. I suppose maybe it's getting the perfect balance of all of these different initiatives, or in an ideal world, all brands just being perfect.
I mean, we've almost got enough product that we can just swap. So my daughter she just sells on Depop and buys. She never goes to high street, and we don't actually need to produce anything more, you could argue, but it misses out somebody from the equation, a whole swathe of people from the equation of what the fashion industry can do.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, at the end of the day, the people who are doing the least to try and change this scenario are the ones with the most power. So how can we as consumers or as businesses or as brands, how can we, really make our voices be heard by the regulators, by government? What sort of things can we do that will actually make a difference? Because I do know that a big issue within sustainable fashion is a lot of people, and it's not just within sustainable fashion, it's just within anything that is a cause, is a lot of people just feeling disheartened and believing that their voice won't have an impact. But how can we make our voice have an impact?
Do any of our surveys for Fashion Roundtable, basically, and then your voice will actually be heard, and it will go to policy leaders, and they will listen. Whether they choose to act on it, we can't guarantee, but we do put forward, solutions. We've got a paper, due in the spring, which is all around representation and inclusion, and trying to make a more inclusive and representative fashion industry. So that does. Yeah, thank you very much. And then also we've got a basically sustainable one, which I can send some links for. And you've got to, we talk about regulators, we talk about government, but who are these regulators? We've got to actually speak to the government, and we've got to make our voice heard. And that's the only way that real change actually happens, from a point where you can police it almost, That's kind of my 10 pence on that.
Absolutely. Tamsin or Hannah, anything to add on that?
I was just wanting to add actually get Jodie's opinion on extended producer responsibility, because that's something I kind of heard about from the Environmental Audit Committee, which of course got turned down by the government. But I think that seems to me to be the answer one. Maybe I don't know. It might be naive. I read something earlier that said, and I'm not saying that the EPR, that brands, if EPR was to happen and brands had to take that on, then, if I'm not saying they should pass on the cost to the customer, but I've read since the 5p charge for a plastic bag came in, use of plastic bags has dropped by 95%. So, and again, I'm not saying we stop buying clothing, but if that, 1p on every item came into effect and that money went towards you know, dealing with the waste of that item when it's discarded at the end of wearable life, that could have such an impact on the textile recycling industry here.
Yeah, there was a lot of debate around the cost of the 1p charge, but I think the concept as a thing is about responsibility and taking care of, firstly, designing something in a way that's actually functioning, suitable, has longevity in mind, or deconstruction in mind, whichever route you choose to go down, and then being responsible for that after it. You know, if you, for example, ended up possibly in Sweden, put something on the ground, you will get fined for it, and you will need to basically deal with that thing. You know, we wouldn't put on a satin LDC, you've got bags that you put outside that has your rubbish in, and you've paid the council to put that waste in, right? So why do we as brands not do that as well? It's our responsibility as makers to take care of the product till it goes to incineration or whatever it is, and pay for that incineration cost as well, you know. So I do think revisiting that, you know, would be a great idea. I just think there was a lot of backlash around the 1p charge at kind of like the time. So I would definitely welcome that discussion to be opened up, really.
Yeah.
I'm just conscious of time, because, wow, it's good. It's been fascinating, but it's flown by. But I think a few people are sort of sadly leaving us, so we will try and wrap it up, folks, so we can let everyone have their dinner, I imagine, and so you can check on your kids. Just if we get some sort of closing, you know, thoughts. You know, obviously the big overriding topic was, can fashion manifest a positive future? How can we do that? We didn't really get much of a chance to touch on the SDGs, but maybe that's a whole other discussion. I know that's from working at the EFI, that is it's definitely not easily discussed in the course of an hour, but maybe we can talk about that another time. But so overall, I mean, do you believe that fashion can manifest a positive future? How overall, what would be like a key takeaway on what the next step in this journey of achieving that is? I know you mentioned at the beginning, Jodie, visualizing it. So maybe, what are we visualizing, and how do we get there?
I think many drops an ocean makes, so every drop counts, and don't underestimate. I can see we've got several students, entrepreneurs, creatives in the space. Don't underestimate what the difference you can make. We've seen individuals who are quite junior really transform the way businesses operate just through pure commitment and dedication to doing things differently. And the other thing would be, I think that we're a creative industry, and so that's our strength. If we can build upon that, we can crack this problem. I think fashion in its essence, when done well, is transformative. It's empowering, it's fulfilling, it's inspiring. Let's make our industry one that's done well. Let's use the emergence, the opportunity to reset the industry through COVID to make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one way, you know, I suppose is through that education as well. And I know, and you know, this is not me flattering you, but I do know that from all of your different organizations, the wealth of education and knowledge that I can get is incredible. And I feel that there's so much to learn in the sphere, and there is so much we can do. So I do recommend to anyone here to make sure that you are following, subscribing to Love Not Landfill, Fashion Roundtable, and Common Objective as well, because the educational resources are amazing. And you know, from a brand perspective as well, Black Neon Digital could help transform you as well. So Jodie or Hannah, do you have any sort of closing thoughts on this? And anyone watching, listening, if you have any closing thoughts or any closing questions, do pop them in the comments.
Okay, I will go. Yeah, I just think we need to, like I say, visualize this world that we're trying to achieve, Is it equitable? Is it everyone to have, I mean, not going down like a cooperative model, but what does this actually look like? Because there are structures that you can create to make this really happen. Is that we're all paid a fair wage? Is that whatever it looks like? Is the world, you know, do we all live better, breathe better, buy less? And do we basically have to literally step by step work backwards? We're in this position now. Where are we trying to aim, and what are the 10 steps, the 12 steps, the 50 steps we need to get there, and actually put that in motion? Because at the moment, I think, particularly with climate change, we, you know, there's, I can't remember the right term for it, but there's this, we think it's such a big issue that we detach ourselves. And if we can't reattach ourselves to this big issue, we forget about it, we neglect it and leave it. So we need to be able to attach ourselves to the workers in Bangladesh, to Leicester, to the climate change, and actually look step by step back. And, you know, together we can definitely achieve those steps together. We just need to work out what they are collectively and get our head down and crack on with it, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Anna, any closing thoughts?
Well, I mean, yeah, from our point of view, we just keep going with trying to change consumer, basically have more people demanding change from the brands that are causing the big problems. So, and I kind of see that is that for these brands, that's the pull. You know, if people start boycotting or start demanding answers to things, that's going to get their attention. And then at the same time, you need the push, which is the legislation that we've talked about. So that's a real big thing for us. But one sort of overriding thing, and this keeps sort of coming to mind at the moment, and it's come up so many times since we've been talking, is this: we would love it to be the norm that an item of clothing has many owners, so that it's just perfectly accepted, whether it be via swapping, rental, second hand, just designing, you know, just high quality clothes that are designed to be worn by multiple users. And that's the kind of thing where LDC can come in. You see, it can come in everywhere, but just that we all assume that you don't wear an item once. An item doesn't have one owner that even wears it many times. You know, that everything, a piece of clothing has more than one owner, I think is something, if that became the norm, if that was just understood, then that could be really powerful.
Fantastic. And I mean, we'll obviously follow up with all attendees across the evening with, you know, links to all of your guys' socials and websites, and any of the links that have been shared in the chat as well. We'll definitely share around in case anyone hasn't clicked them, so we'll make sure you all get that information. Jackie has just added that it's very key to keep in mind the social impact. Ultimately, humans are the biggest influence on the environment, so all over the world. And thanks very much for this conversation. It was great. Well, thank you to Jackie. We've really enjoyed it also. So hopefully everyone feels a bit more informed, but overall positive, I would say. I know that we talked about some fairly depressing things, but I think overall we're leaving this, you know, leaving this feeling a bit, well, I am anyway, feeling positive and feeling like there really is a chance for change. And I mean, I know that I'm fortunate enough every day to work with such an incredible community of designers that it's not hard to feel positive, because they are doing amazing things. And I think, like Tamsin said, you know, as much as we move forward and find new ways to increase sustainability in fashion, we need to make sure that those who are doing well aren't actually being left behind by some of these initiatives. So I think that's very important as well. And remembering that fashion is one of the biggest employers in the world. It does, you know, as much as it has a negative impact, it does have a positive impact on people's lives. So I do think that is very important to bear in mind going forward for the future. And I think hopefully just more conversations like this and more like-minded people getting together and feeling like they really can make a difference will actually start to make a difference. And we can rely on Jodie for the policy bit.
You've got to fill the survey in. Everyone.
Like I said, I fill out all your surveys and I read the newsletter religiously. But and it is important, like you said, it's a really, really good opportunity to have your voice heard. And I do feel like I am being heard, which isn't always the case. And yeah, I mean, follow everyone. And we do also have live podcast recordings. Well, not quite yet for Hannah, but we do have live podcast recordings with Tamsin and almost Hannah. Maybe we'll get one with you too, Jodie, soon, where we talk about some of the issues we've covered tonight, but also other ones. So do check the podcast page out on LDC so you can give those a listen. And yeah, thank you for highlighting LYL, Tamsin. They are a very interesting brand and have, you know, were invented to essentially redesign power dressing for women, which is a fantastic concept, all the while being sustainable, which is even better. And Cherika is an inspirational woman, definitely. So do check them out, as well as all the other brands on LDC, because there are some great ones on there.
I'm just getting lost in the browsing. Beautiful gung ho as well. Wow.
Gung ho is fantastic.
A favorite of mine as well.
She manages to communicate such impactful things through fashion. She was originally an artist, but found that she wanted people to be able to express her designs in a different way. She wanted her opinions to be worn rather than just put up on a wall. So that's how she started out. She actually grew up in a carbon neutral household. Her father is pretty innovative in architecture, and apparently people thought she was very odd as a kid living in a house like that, but boy do I envy her now. So she's definitely ahead of the curve. Postcode, yeah, first part, yeah, definitely. The water collection is actually one of my favorites of hers. It's so beautiful, the colors. We will make sure all these links go in an email to get because I feel like there's quite a lot of things being shared. And thank you all for sharing, and thank you for your comments and your questions. Tamsin, Jodie, Hannah, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and thank you for all you're doing in this sphere. It really is making such a positive impact, and you are all part of the reasons that I even got interested in this in the first place. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
And hopefully we can do this again soon, hopefully in person.
That'd be nice.
One of our upcoming stores, even if it only can be sort of 15 to 20 1 meter apart attendees, I'm sure we can make it happen, and also stream it digitally for those who can't attend. So yeah, without further ado, I pronounce this fantastic discussion closed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining, guys, and hope everyone has a lovely rest of your evening. No kiddie disturbances this evening, so congratulations. And thanks again, and let's definitely speak soon.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Are you able to